Now, in the best of all worlds, if they would set up a nonpartisan, bipartisan, outside committee like we did for 9/11 and put people of unimpeachable integrity, both Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives, but people who were willing to go where the facts led them, that would be ideal.
Secretary Clinton, we've formed this committee at your request to determine just why you lost the 2016 presidential election.
That is the most important question, and I would certainly welcome congressional discussion and debate about this.
There have been a number of questions about the election campaign, and we hope that we can have them answered to the satisfaction of the American people, so that we can all move on.
That is the hoped for outcome.
Of course, in every political campaign, somebody wins and somebody loses.
There was no guarantee about how it would turn out.
How much money did your campaign spend on trying to get you elected?
If you want it in monetary terms, slightly over $1 billion.
As I understand it, it was $1.2 billion, the most expensive political campaign in history.
Unfortunately, that proved insufficient.
And in the process, the deep state faced the possibility that Donald Trump, a candidate whom they could not control, might be elected president.
They could not stand idly by and permit that to happen.
Turning to election night, can you tell us just what was going on behind the scenes when you realized that you were going to lose the election?
We began to reach out to everyone we could possibly think who could help with this terrible incident. During the course of the following hours, obviously I spoke to the White House.
One reporter who claimed to have inside sources claimed that when you realized you were going to lose, you popped open a bottle of Chardonnay and threw the cork away.
He reported very accurately about what he observed.
But Secretary Clinton, in your state of mind that night, by doing that, you could have gotten yourself into a blind, drunken rage and had viciously attacked everybody in the room.
That's what I was trying to do during those very desperate and difficult hours.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, Secretary.
A lot of people who were close to you were concerned that you were losing your mind.
I can't speak to specific pieces, Congressman, but I was well aware of the concerns we all had.
And it took them a long time to convince you to see a therapist.
I see nothing at all unusual about trying to figure out when would be the best time to do that.
It sometimes takes a great deal of courage to seek help when you need it. What are some of the symptoms you were displaying?
Well, thank you, Congressman. I think there has been some confusion.
What kind of confusion?
Kind of dysfunction and failure to make decisions.
Do you mean uncertainty as to what you should do or say?
It does sound accurate, except I'm not sure exactly.
What about before your election defeat? Say, throughout your political career, how would you describe your decision-making skills?
It's a very unpredictable and even erratic process.
And how often in your political career have you made disastrous decisions?
999 times out of 1,000.
And that makes you
incredibly unstable and dangerous.
As possible proof of your poor decision-making skills, someone leaked an audio recording of your session with the therapist. You can read the subtitles on the screen.
Deeply distressing to me.
That's interesting.
I would imagine I've thought more about what happened. I've lost more sleep. I have been racking my brain about what more could have been done or should have been done.
You know what makes me sad? You do!
Maybe we should chug on over to Mamby-Pamby land, where maybe we can find some self-confidence for you, you jackwagon! Tissue? Cry, baby.
You should have considered that a former Marine drill sergeant might not make a very good therapist. A major reason that people would support a particular candidate is that they've seen that candidate's record, seen their accomplishments. I wonder just why you didn't point to your accomplishments while you were running for president.
You would wonder why, but I can tell you.
When you were First Lady, your signature issue was health care. You and a few so-called experts got together and wrote a bill in secret, but it was such a disaster that even with the Democrats in charge of the presidency and firmly in charge of both houses of Congress, it was dead on arrival.
Too bad about that.
In 1999, your potential rival for the U.S. Senate seat from New York in the year 2000 was John F. Kennedy, Jr. He almost certainly would have won the nomination and the election if he had not died in a mysterious small airplane crash. Considering that you gained from John's death, do you feel any particular sadness or discomfort about him dying in a plane crash?
No, I'm very happy we did it.
During your 8 years in the United States Senate, you sponsored only 3 bills that became law. Those bills named a post office, renamed a stretch of highway, and redesignated a historic house a historic site. How do you account for your lack of accomplishment in the United States Senate?
Boy, it's so much harder than I thought it would be. This is really tough. I had no idea.
Barack Obama said that you were one of the best secretaries of state the United States ever had. What was your signature accomplishment?
4 dead Americans.
Well, there was also the death of Muammar Gaddafi.
As we came, we saw, he died.
I don't know why that's funny.
I don't think it's funny either. Hey, cool it. Take a chill pill. Enough already. Good. Okay. Now, what about the accusations that you, as Secretary of State, were selling your influence and along with it, American foreign policy?
That's what I tried to do every day as Secretary of State.
Were you doing this at every opportunity?
Maybe I missed a few chances.
Let's now turn our attention to the glass ceilings that people say you broke on behalf of women.
I think that's another very important question.
Do you know how many women there were in the United States Senate before you became a senator?
I don't recall.
There were 27. Do you know how many women still in the Senate when you arrived in the year 2001?
I don't recall that.
There were 10. 17 women had already come and gone in the United States Senate by the time you arrived. How many women entered the Senate at the same time you did?
I don't recall.
There were 3. By the time you entered the Senate, the so-called glass ceiling had long been shattered and had become a broad avenue.
Wow.
How many women served at federal cabinet level positions before you became Secretary of State?
There were a number of them, I know that.
There were 23 serving in 24 positions. How many female Secretaries of State were before you?
I don't recall.
There were 2, Madeleine Albright and Condoleezza Rice. So in your entire political career, you have never broken any glass ceilings.
Don't you someday want to see a woman president of the United States of America?
Of course. Kelly Conway, or maybe Katie Hopkins if we could get her a fake birth certificate.
Get out of my space. Back up, you creep.
I think at this point we should proceed to another topic.
I agree with you completely.
John Podesta and your husband Bill seem very different from one another, but they worked very closely together on your campaign.
I know it's possible to find common ground.
Oh, what do they have in common?
They are super predators. No conscience, no empathy.
It sounds like a beautiful friendship.
Well, I would echo what you said.
There has been some belated concern about government officials committing sexual assault in Washington.
It's what happened during the Clinton administration.
Oh, I'm referring to U.S. senators and representatives sexually assaulting interns, staffers, and in some cases, minor children.
I think you have to look at that in context.
What do you mean?
I think that is not an uncommon experience here in Washington.
And just how common is it?
That's what they do every day.
Well, there must be millions of women working at various levels of government in Washington. Was this abuse systemic?
Just part of the tradition. There are millions of them, as you point out. They are sorted through and directed to the appropriate personnel. Very few of them ever come to my attention.
Do you know anything about the staffer who was found dead in then Congressman Joe Scarborough's office?
The kind of attack that took place would have been very difficult to repel.
This is terrible. You were a senator. What were you doing while all this was going on?
I was, running a child trafficking operation in the basement of a pizzeria.
You mean you participated in this?
I did.
Whoa, I find that hard to believe.
I know that's not the answer you want to hear because it's being asked in many different ways by committee members, but those are the facts.
All during the campaign, your presidential campaign, the Counterfeit News Network, and many others made a big issue out of the supposed Trump-Russia collusion narrative.
This was the biggest nothing burger ever. It was a mistake.
What do you mean?
Well, that it was factually untrue. And I think your questioning and what I have stated today is a much clearer and more factual description.
If it was a big nothing burger, why was your campaign and the fake news media pushing it?
You have some very legitimate questions about what we were doing.
Okay, so give me a legitimate answer.
We were desperate.
So?
I believe we have to use every tool at our disposal.
But the Counterfeit News Network is still pushing it, and a lot of other foolishness besides.
I don't know why they are saying this. I think on the one hand, it's part of the wacky strategy. Just say all these crazy things and maybe you can get some people to believe you. On the other hand, it just absolutely makes no sense.
But it all started with your campaign.
Sorry, people of America.
Let's take a look at whether the vote was fairly counted.
I think that's another very important question.
You won 20 out of 50 states, 205 out of 435 congressional districts, and 487 out of 3,141 counties. Do you think that a candidate who is rejected by 60% of the states, 53% of the congressional districts, and 85% of the counties in the United States should be handed the presidency?
I don't think that's a relevant question.
Your supporters claim that you won the popular vote because you got more votes than Donald Trump.
Now, I certainly agree 100%.
Except for one thing. Donald Trump was rejected by 54% of the voters. You were rejected by 52% of the voters. Realistically, who won the popular vote?
Nobody.
Then let's look at the voter identification laws in the 50 states and the District of Columbia.
They certainly are worthy of follow-up.
Do you know how many states there are in which identification is not even requested?
Well, there have been 19, including the one that
That's 19 states and the District of Columbia. Kathy Griffin could just walk into the polls and say she's Richard Nixon, and if Nixon's name has not yet been removed from the voter registration rolls, she could vote as Richard Nixon. You carried 11 of those 19 states and the District of Columbia. There are 23 states in which ID is requested, but not strictly required. You carried 8 out of those 23 states. In 9 states, some form of voter ID is strictly required. You carried only 1 of those 9 states, Virginia, and as I recall, there were some widespread complaints about the touchscreen voting machines. The votes were being flipped. So you may not have honestly carried any states. How many illegal aliens voted for you in the 2016 presidential campaign?
There are millions of them.
I couldn't help wondering one thing. In the states where no ID is even requested, why didn't you steal the vote in all 19 states?
There were a number of reasons for that. Sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't.
Look, I take responsibility for every decision I made, but that's not why I lost.
Why did you lose?
We don't probably have enough time for everything.
Give it a try.
Vast right-wing conspiracy, now it's a vast Russian conspiracy. Contacts between Trump campaign officials and Trump associates with Russians. Putin wants to bring us down, and he is an old KGB agent. This was the GRU, which is the military intelligence arm of the Russian military, and they have a very sophisticated cyber operation. 1,000 Russian agents who were involved in delivering those messages. The Russians, let's say WikiLeaks, same thing, dumped the John Podesta emails. I inherit nothing from the Democratic Party. It was bankrupt. It was on the verge of insolvency. Its data was mediocre to poor, non-existent, wrong. I had to inject money into it.
And then let's not forget sexism and misogyny, which are endemic to our society. And multiple news organizations, and of course,
it's the mainstream media. Dean Baquet here from the New York Times. The networks made more money than they've made in years. Lots of network executives saying things like, you know, he may not be good for the country, but he's good for business. Media forces on the Republican side are entrenched and very effective. So you've got, obviously, Fox.
called the basket of deplorables. Millions of white people. Yeah, millions of white people.
Trump's Twitter account being populated by millions of bots. Google searches going on about WikiLeaks. People on their Facebook pages, a lot of harvesting of Facebook information. Allies within the internet world, phony stories, to Netflix, and say you want to see a political documentary. 8 of the top 10 were screeds against President Obama or me. Xenophobia or anti-Islamophobia, whatever it is. And, you know, DC Leaks and Guccifer, which were dropping a lot of this stuff on me, guys over in Macedonia who are running these fake news sites, and Bannon, who'd been running the Breitbart operations, InfoWars, to former Director Comey. The Comey letter, which partly based on a false memo from the Russians. You know, Comey was more than happy to talk about my emails.
Leaders from both parties.
Barack Obama and Republican governors and legislatures began doing everything they could to suppress the vote. Because Wisconsin, under the current governor, Scott Walker, has been one of the leaders in voter suppression. I also think I was the victim of a very broad assumption I was going to win. Conspiracies, lies, false information.
A nostalgia.
Citizens United, content farms through an enormous investment in falsehoods, fake news, call it what you will. There are forces in our country, put the Russians to one side, who have been fighting rearguard actions for as long as I've been alive, and it turned out that, you know, our information was not as reliable as I wished it had been. A low information voter.
And there were a large number of people who didn't care.
The polling,
some, you know, right-wing commentators, right-wing members of Congress, whatever.
The tech revolution really weaponized politically, and some people went third party. Unaccountable money flowing in against me, against other Democrats, weaponized information, the weaponization and manipulation of that information. Women in the suburbs, you know, just a wide range.
A lot of people